come around. Again, the world has changed and the world is changing. We're here today beginning a 2-day colloquium, and we're going to be discussing that singular thing, the pandemic that has changed the world, that is changing the world, COVID-19. And so today we're beginning a 2-day colloquium, and it's titled COVID-19 in Retrospect, Responses to the Pandemic, Vaccine Discovery, and the Politics of PharmaCare in Africa. This program is hosted by the Rhodes University African Studies Center in association with the Institute of Africa and Diaspora Studies, University of Lagos. And it's funded by Open Society of Southern Africa, OSISA. This morning, we're going to have just an opening speech from the director of the African Studies Center, Rhodes University, in the person of Professor Innocent Masindo. We also would like to let you know that we're having 2 lectures today at 10:20. We're going to have Professor Babatunde Lawal Salako, his Director General, Nigeria Institute of Medical Research, Nigeria. And then later in the afternoon, we're going to be having Dr. Mohammed Abdul Laziz, Head Disease Control and Prevention, Africa Cdc, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It's a beautiful thing to have you all here this morning. Thank you for your time. Just a little intro before I invite the director to give the opening remarks. These sessions are going to be recorded. And so if you, during the discussion sessions, if you do not want to be recorded, just let us know. Otherwise, every part of the session today and tomorrow will be recorded. It's also important to let you know that you have to have your microphones muted if you are not asking questions or making contributions. During the question session, you can leave your question in the question and answer sessions, and then we will have you attended to. So it's my delight to give the introduction, opening remark, Professor Innocent Masindo. He is a very lively man. I've listened to him speak before, and he's been working night and day to have this day come. So Prof, welcome to give your opening remark.
Thank you very much for such a mouthful remarks from you, Dr. Akin Otiko. We just await someone who must put their mic off now because of the echoes that are coming to me now. Okay, I hope that's all in order. Thank you very much. I am not going to speak for long, but I would like at this juncture to greet the VC of Rhodes University, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, and all members of the senior management of the institution who every time do create this enabling environment for us to pursue the academic project. We also would like to appreciate the presence of our distinguished panelists and all our colleagues from other institutions, including Nelson Mandela University, the University of Lagos, and a number of other institutions that will be a part of our endeavor in the next 2 days. I would like to appreciate the panelists, our distinguished panelists, an assemblage of very, very senior persons in their respective areas and professions. Professor Salim Abdul Karim, who was the former chairperson of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 for the Republic of South Africa, and who is obviously the head of CAPRISA, an organization that deals with research relating to HIV and other issues. He is an expert scientist himself, and the introductions you will hear later. I want to also appreciate our other panelist, Dr. Mohammed Abdulaziz, who is the head of the Africa Union's Africa Center for Disease Control. He will be with us as well during this colloquium. Ms. Caroline Kabomhe, the head of programs for OSISA, Southern Africa, who will also be a part of our panel. Professor Babatunde Lawal Salako, the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research. We will welcome him as well. As well as lastly, Professor A.E. Abayomi, who has honored us, is an Honorable Commissioner of Health for Lagos State in Nigeria. In addition to that, we would like to welcome you all distinguished guests here present and those who join us in the course of the colloquium. So allow me to open this with just a few remarks that I will make. Our colleagues, it's now tried to say that the world has been gripped by a deadly virus, the coronavirus pandemic, which has significantly affected the economy, which has significantly impacted on livelihoods, be they rural or urban. It has also impacted on the nature of the state and its relationship with citizens, as well as shaking the medical fraternity, and also brought into question the future of PharmaCare. We do believe that some of these questions will arise and issues will arise as we partake of the colloquia during the course of today and tomorrow. Although we are not yet out of the woods, colleagues, it is very clear that we deliberately themed this conference as COVID-19 in retrospect to show not the fact that the COVID-19 is ending, because it is not at the moment, but to demonstrate that we are optimistic. And in our optimism, we thought we could also open up spaces for reflection on a number of issues, as you will enjoy and grapple with in the course of these 2 days. So we are definitely aware of the several initiatives that are being done by scientists and many other organizations in an effort to deal with the pandemic. However, it is our view that we realize that to date, and we speak here under correction, that although there have been these efforts to come up with the vaccines relating to dealing with the coronavirus, none of the companies are headquartered in Africa, which is on its own a land of about 1.3 billion people, if I am correct, as we keep giving birth to people every day. So it is greater than the population of Europe itself and the USA combined. And in fact, these areas, these continents are where the majority of the pharmaceutical companies are domiciled, and none is headquarters in the continent, as I had said. But look, with our high populations and with one of the biggest, we will be one of the biggest consumers of the vaccines of this kind, and perhaps a large part of the experiments done by global pharmaceutical corporations will be probably done on the continent. Now, the question is, how much money is invested into this drug discovery in Africa, and to what effect? Our medical research institutes today fit for purpose, or do they merely mirror what we call their colonial selves? We are particularly interested as the African Studies Center at Rhodes University, and also as the Institute of African Diaspora Studies at the University of Lagos. We are interested in engaging our panelists on a number of key issues that are not necessarily exhaustive, but perhaps focusing specifically on these kinds of things that I will say here. We would like to reflect on the national or state intervention or responses to the pandemic itself. We would also want to share some kind of discussion around the state of medical research on the continent itself, the role of the African Union in terms of its responses to COVID-19, the place of the Centers for Disease Control in Africa in terms of their efficacy and positionality in the face of medical emergencies, as well as Africa's role in the global politics of medical research and drug discovery. As well, I'd like to probe questions around issues of medical consumerism and the African experience of the same. And in fact, perhaps we will close at some point with very deep reflections on whether Afro medical futures and also whether there are possibilities of mulling about the role of indigenous medical knowledge systems in the health system reform. Colleagues, I want to suggest that this colloquium came at a very critical time and is being organized here by us in the humanities because we felt that we needed an honest conversation with those who are in the scientific world so that we will be able to ask and also perhaps find answers to uncomfortable questions around issues of disease control on the continent. And for this reason, colleagues, we are very, very privileged to have our our distinguished panelists who will be sharing with us, which most of whom I have already introduced. Professor Abdul Karim, Professor Mohammed Abdul Aziz, Miss Caroline Kabombe, Professor Babatunde Lawal Salako, who is in meeting already. And thank you for popping in time, Professor Salako. And
thank you very much.
Professor Abayomi. So I would like not to belabor you because I'm not the main speaker, but we're gonna hear more from the experts that will be talking to us in the course of today. I would like at this point as well to appreciate the role played by our funder, our sponsor, the Open Society for Southern Africa, OSISA Foundation, which is represented here by its delegates, including Madame Segofa Fatse Dipukwane. So we are privileged, and with this, I end my opening remarks. Please feel free to enjoy yourself during the course of these sessions. I thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mashindo. It's been always beautiful to have you. Now the table is set. We have our first speaker and the person of Professor Lawal Salako. I know him in person. He is smooth when it comes to talking because he has his facts, he has his resources. He's the Director General of the Nigeria Institute of Medical Research. I know the institute was foremost when COVID began, and then they were foremost in finding how to come up with tools, test kits for COVID-19. And his institute is top-notch, and they are foremost when it comes to having tests done in Lagos, which is the epicenter of COVID-19 in Nigeria. So it is my delight, it is my pleasure to welcome to speak to us Professor Babatunde Lawal Salako, Director General, Nigeria Institute of Medical Research. Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Tiko. Good morning, distinguished panelists. Specifically, let me acknowledge the Honorable Commissioner for Health Lagos State, if he's already on the call, because we have been doing this together in Lagos State since the beginning of this pandemic. I would like to share my screen. I hope I'm allowed to do that. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Prof. We can.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So once again, good morning. I want to thank Professor Chico and Professor Masindo for inviting me to be part of this very important conversation at this time when the world is facing a very big challenge from the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. My topic is challenges and positionality of medical research in Nigeria, especially in relation to COVID-19 vaccine research. I'm going to first of all tell you exactly what I plan to tell you. That's my outline. We'll start by introducing Nigeria, my country. I don't know whether there are people who haven't visited Nigeria before. A little bit about Nigeria profile in terms of health indices and geography. We'll also talk a little bit about my institution. Then I'll move on to the challenges of medical research, just a little bit of it. Thereafter, I'll talk about my institute's activities during the pandemic in relation to vaccine research, to device development, to aid diagnosis, research in the field to improve the control of pandemic in our country. Talk about research capacity and how we have been trying to mitigate the challenges. My first slide really is to introduce my institution. That is the entrance of the gate. And when you enter, this is what you see here. The Nigerian Institute of Medical Research really was established long time ago in the early 1920s as a yellow fever research and vaccine production center. It has since moved from that to act at one point or the other as the West African Council for Medical Research. Then by 1977, it was reenacted to become the National Institute of Medical Research. And lately, it's now in the Federal Ministry of Health as the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research. Now, Nigeria as a country, as of 2018, is a population of 190 million. We often quote over 200 million. I believe by the next census, we will be able to determine how many we are in the country. 70% of our population live in the rural areas. And much more importantly is about our health indices, which has remained very poor, although where we are now was a significant improvement from the beginning of the Millennium Development Goal that ended in 2015. And so we now have a maternal mortality of 814 per 100,000 live birth, and under 5 mortality of about 89 per 1,000 live birth. More than 250 ethnic groups, and top 10 causes of death in Nigeria remains lower respiratory tract infection, issues of malaria, HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, mainly infectious diseases. Gradually, NCDC is creeping up. We now have ischemic heart disease, which doesn't used to surface in our picture before, stroke, and then cirrhosis of the liver. The main mandate of our institution is to conduct research into diseases of public health importance in Nigeria and provide enabling environment for research, training facilities, and collaboration between the Federal Ministry of Health, the State Ministry of Health. That's why we have been working well with some state ministries, especially the Lagos State where we are based, including the universities, institutions within and outside Nigeria. Our research capacity in terms of measurement of a number of researchers within the country. If you look at the top right-hand corner, you will see that in terms of absolute number, Nigeria and South Africa in Africa seem to be doing very well, in quotes, while we follow very closely South Africa. Whereas if you look at the one below, which looks at the number of researchers per million population, Nigeria doesn't seem to be doing as well as it looks like when we're looking at the absolute number. We therefore need a lot more researchers. We need to groom a lot more, preparing for the future for Nigeria. And when you look at this map of the world, which shows some blue, white, and light blue colors, the darker the blue color, the higher the number of researchers per million population. And you could see Africa, except somewhere here in South Africa, which is a little bit better than the rest of Africa. So Africa needs to have more of researchers per million population. When we look at or measure research productivity in Nigeria, again, this map shows that Nigeria seems to be pulling its weight when we look at the absolute number of papers published in country, following South Africa. But by the time you look at this per million population, again, we don't seem to be doing as well as that showed. This slide shows a report of 9 funding agencies in Africa and an interactive map where you can actually interact and see how many, among these 9 funding agencies, how many research have been funded in sub-Saharan Africa, and who are the leading PIs receiving funding from that 9 funders. And you could see the distribution. Again, East and Southern Africa appears to be doing a lot better than the West Africa, where Nigeria belongs. And this, on the second one, this bar chart is specifically for Nigeria, looking at the direct award that goes to the country, and then the collaborative award. And you see that we have a lot more of collaborative award compared to the direct award. We need to do a lot more, and this may be a reflection of the number of researchers that I showed before, and in fact, the ability and capacity to come up with award-winning grants in Nigeria. Now, this, of course, shows some of the gaps in the capacity of Nigeria as a research country. We have very few researchers, as I've shown before, and poor and aged infrastructures like laboratory. And we have weak expertise when it comes to preparing a manuscript and putting together award-winning proposals. Apart from that, it's also been shown that Africa as a whole seems to have about 90% of disease burden, but what is available to Africa is about 10% of the funding. Again, this may be a reflection of Africa's ability to compete effectively with other countries to win foreign grants. Again, in the last 2 decades, about 1,500 new drugs which have been made available publicly, only about 2% of that are meant for specific tropical diseases. We haven't been coming up with innovations and drug discoveries that will benefit our people. And these are the areas of weakness. So what happens is that the high-income investigator countries have dominated the research area, And therefore, they dictate the agenda and priorities. And some of these priorities may not be appropriate for specific countries, especially in Nigeria. And if that happens, that means that the conclusions of such research may not have any direct benefit to the local requirements which individual countries require. I mean, this really is the peculiar situation with Nigeria. And that's why you saw in the previous slide that more collaborative effort existed beyond direct award. Now, again, peculiar to Nigeria, the research in Nigeria is mainly donor-driven. The country needs to do a lot more by making available funding. So far, it's about 0.8% of the budgets compared to 1 to 2% that's been recommended. More importantly, getting research into policy and practice has a challenge, and we need to do a lot more about research culture. Now, this shows the funding for the Ministry of Health in Nigeria, showing that the highest we have had is about 6% of the budget, whereas what's been recommended by WHO is 15%. And yet it is inside this 5% or less that is required, that health research is required to be funded. So research needs to be funded much more than what we have now. Now, let's look at some key statistics in terms of research and innovation in Nigeria. When you look at quality of scientific organization, we ranked about 120 out of 137. That's not too good. And the availability of scientists and engineers, we ranked 79 out of 137. Now, research output, we may seem to have done a bit better. In 2018, there was a total production of over 9,000 publications, and 8,000 or more of that were actually produced in a citable or citable publications. That is very good. And when we look at 1996 to 2018, a total of about 90,000 papers with an average citation number of 7 was produced. But if you then look at output as a percentage of output in Africa, in 2018, just 12.1%. And 2015, 10.2%. Maybe some little improvement. However, when you put that on the percentage of what has been produced in the whole world, it's much more or less than 0.5%. So again, this is a reflection of the number of researchers and the abilities of these researchers to produce manuscripts and winning grants. The top 10 subject areas in Nigeria as research include medicine, engineering, social sciences, agriculture, and co. And medicine seem to be the most active with about 16.4% of all the production. So these have shown really where our challenges and weaknesses are. And it is with these challenges and weaknesses that we faced COVID-19 in 2020. So that tells you clearly the area of inactivities where we cannot come up with vaccines, for example, local vaccines for Nigeria or Africa as a country. And of course, our ability to come up with some other solutions in terms of drug discoveries and diagnostic devices and co. However, in the midst of all of this, my institution tried as much as possible to work with others to do the best we can in the control of the pandemic. And I'm going to enumerate quickly some of the areas where we have worked. We did work with Nigerian Center for Disease Control, the Lagos State Ministry of Health, and the Redeemers University. When we had the index case of SARS-CoV-2 in Nigeria. That was in the custody of the Honorable Commissioner for Health, who is, I believe, on this call in Lagos State, who provided the samples for our institution to sequence the virus to kind of confirm the virus that the index case has. I'm going to be referring to that later. We also work with some private facility in Lagos by assisting them to provide COVID-19 tests for people, especially those of them that have been admitted in their institution. We collaborated with an NGO to establish what we regarded as the first drive/walkthrough center in Nigeria, or West Africa and sub-region, to provide opportunities for members of the community to be tested and be tested free. What we adapted really was a drive-through, which we adjusted and then add a walkthrough, because we knew that some people may not have vehicles to drive to the center, and yet they may require to do the test. And again, we work with another foundation, the Faith Foundation, which supported us with a grant of about 20 million to develop a test kit, which we call SIMA, as SARS-CoV-2 isothermal molecular assay. I'm going to refer to that a little later. We were also able to contact and got the support of Aliko Dangote Foundation when we noticed that a lot of people who are in the isolation center required oxygen, and that oxygen is scarce and the mode of delivery had issues. We partnered with some of our colleagues in the US to adapt CPAP oxygen helmet, which has been used in the US for treatment of chronic lung diseases, respiratory distress, to acquire some of them in Nigeria and see how best this can assist our situation. So we got support from the Federal Ministry of Health to train people with the funding from Aliko Dangote Foundation, and then see how best this CPAP or oxygen element could be used to treat COVID-19 respiratory distress in some centers. We also work with the NCDC, the University of College London, and the US CDC to carry out a seroprevalence study of COVID-19 in Nigeria. And Lagos, being the epicenter, was one of the four states that were studied. I will be referring to that later. The funding came from the NCDC, the UCL, and the US CDC. The US CDC Foundation, also we got a grant to train, to distribute, and more importantly, to assess the risk of COVID-19 infection during the use of CPAP elements that we're introducing to the isolation center. And from the federal government, we got significant COVID-19 intervention fund, which enable us to purchase and acquire an NGS with an automated robotic library prep. So this slide shows the phylogenetic tree of the index case that we sequenced in Nigeria. Just before the pandemic broke out, we had this existing collaboration with China CDC and the Institute Pasteur in Dakar. Our impression then was to send our people to learn more about pathogen identification in case we have any outbreak. And lo and behold, not more than 2 months when the researchers came back, about 6 of them, there was an outbreak of COVID-19 disease. And that put us in good stead, really, with the new knowledge that our staff have just acquired, to be able to put that into use to sequence the SARS-CoV-2 virus that came into Nigeria. I must say that this was done first by my institution, even though at the second day or thereabout, the Redeemers University also came up with the sequence of the same virus because the samples were given to the two institutions. We had a partial sequence good enough to confirm SARS-CoV-2 strains, and the phylogenetic tree also showing that bat coronavirus had been seen in Nigeria before in 2016, and MERS virus was seen in camel at about the same time. So my institution was the first to sequence that virus, even though we all came up with a joint report, since we're talking about the same sample from the same person. Now, our drive/walk-through center looks like this. What people needed to do was to visit our website to register, and then we triage to determine who should come for this test, because at that time, the NCDC has criteria for people that could be tested. And since they were the ones supporting us with test kit, we can only follow that criteria. So people are invited based on that, and then they get tested and get their results within 48 hours, unless there are issues with the result. And it was done for free. It started in March 30th, and it's still ongoing. Now, the beauty of this is not just to make tests available to Nigerians, but we're also able to follow the number of people that have been tested in the center, the number of positive cases, and clearly it gave us the opportunity to look at how the infection behaved in terms of positivity. And looking at the result from that center, you can actually see the two waves that Nigeria has experienced, the way it is. This then, as we followed it up, gave me the opportunity sometimes in November last year to be able to predict that Nigeria may be going into a second wave from my Twitter handle. And indeed, from these results, we were able to do so. Now we are coming down again, March, April, and we are following it up so that if we are going to have a third wave, we will be able to pick this up. This was the tweet that I made on November 13, when we saw that the cases were beginning to go up at the end of the first wave. And we said there has been recent increase in the number of positive cases of COVID-19 disease at our testing center and laboratory. Nigerians need to prepare for a second wave. And indeed, the second wave came. We also worked with Faith Foundation, like I said, to try and make some contribution to diagnostics of COVID-19, because at the time when the disease came, we had only a few laboratories in Nigeria, molecular laboratories that can diagnose the disease. But now, kudos to the NCDC and the Federal Ministry of Health, we now have more than 100 both public and private diagnostic centers across the country. So the test is not difficult to do, except for the cost. Our scientists were therefore able to adapt to produce what we call SIMA, which is SARS-CoV-2 isothermal molecular assay, adapting it to T1C's ISO instrument, which provide COVID-19 results within 40 minutes. And the advantage of this is that if you have an automated RNA extraction machine, you may be able to take this to the rural areas where people don't have the opportunity to test, and set up your lab just in one corner, and within 1 hour, you could actually extract and then produce results with this machine within 40 minutes. This was validated by 3 other laboratories in Nigeria, And I must say that currently it's with regulatory agents in the country looking at the possibility of registration and validation by them. When we discovered that getting T1C CISO machine became very difficult at the time because the machines were not produced in Nigeria, we then went back to again develop another PCR, real-time PCR technique diagnosis with what we call SCODA, which is SARS-CoV-2 detection assay, which can produce results after extraction within 57 minutes. It's faster and 70% cheaper than what we get from outside the country. So these were the two diagnostic tests that our institute produced to support diagnosis in Nigeria. We had also earlier on, when the NCDC lamented that RNA extraction kits were very scarce in the country, we took that challenge and we came up with our Naima Biotech RNA extraction kit from support from the federal government and the funding that the institute had. Again, this was validated by 3 other big laboratories, including the NCDC lab in Nigeria. And currently is being used by our institution for all the diagnosis and the extraction that we're doing in the institute. We now have prospective entrepreneurs who are interested in some of these discovery, and we are currently negotiating on how to pass this over to them for mass production. Beyond that, we work with the NCDC, the University College London, and the US CDC in Nigeria to carry out a seroprevalence study of COVID-19 in Nigeria. And this was necessary because people were concerned about the number of cases that the NCDC was displaying at its website. And there were insinuations that we were not getting the right and the true picture of infection within the country. So we came up with this seroprevalence study with the UCL and the US CDC and the NCDC to actually study 4 states in Nigeria, trying to do south, southeast, southwest, and north east, north central in Nigeria to look at the burden of COVID-19 disease in Nigeria. And true to insinuation, the results showed that there were more people that have developed antibodies and have come in contact with COVID-19 virus in Nigeria, much more than is being reported on a daily basis. Lagos, which is the epicenter of the infection, was about 23% of the population that had come in contact with the COVID-19 virus. And at that time, or as I speak, we are yet to record about 200,000 cases, active cases, by the NCDC. So this shows that if you take the population of Lagos, which is about 20 million, close to 5 million people in Lagos alone have come in contact with the virus. That will be the simple and direct interpretation of these studies. And the same thing with the other states that we have studied. So we actually have within the community much more number of people than being seen on a daily basis that have come in contact with the COVID-19 virus because they've developed the antibodies. Now, this was at the end of the first wave in Lagos. Now, if we repeat that now, after the second wave, I am sure that we're going to be having a report that is much more than this among the population. It's a reflection of our capacity to be able to develop herd immunity, as many people as possible developing antibodies to the virus, will give us that opportunity, especially if vaccine comes to Nigeria. If we have more people vaccinated in Nigeria. Now, we did quickly look at the differences between the urban and the rural center, and there were differences as expected in all the 4 states that were studied. I did say that with the CDC Foundation in the US and the support of Aliko Dangote Foundation, we actually got this oxygen helmet and this continuous airway positive pressure to manage COVID-19 respiratory disease in Nigeria. This CPAP has been used over the years in the US to treat, I think, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases and other respiratory diseases. So we then adapted the development of oxygen helmet to this and see how best this can develop high flow rate oxygen to the individual who required oxygen during COVID-19 admission in some of the isolation center. We actually did use 8 isolation centers spread all over the country. And of course, majority of the people who use it, both patients and physicians, describe this as the game changer in the management of the disease. The challenges are oxygen, lack of adequate oxygen, because this is better used with oxygen coming from the pipe rather than from the cylinder, and the fact that you need a large amount of oxygen in the helmet for the patient to benefit directly from this treatment. And these are the steering committee for the project. The project is named the Circumvent Project, chaired by Professor Andrew Felton and Gbenga Ogedengbe from the New York universities, and then joined by Alan Stellenbosch and Alex Hostin, who is the engineer that ensure the availability of the CPAP and the helmet. And we have Ima here, an infectious disease specialist, and then my humble self. And we formed the Circumvent Project Steering Committee, where we established the National Implementation Committee that searched out the 8 centers that were used for the training of the oxygen helmet. Now, we have not left effort on vaccine design and development as an institution. We took it as a challenge with the support of the little fund that came from Federal Ministry of Health and the Federal Government of Nigeria. We went into the laboratory to see what we could do as an institution in the development of local vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 and other vaccines, other infectious diseases in Nigeria. And we actually look at 2 ways. We're looking at development of a protein subunit peptide of SARS-CoV-2, and then we're looking at the possibility of inactivating the virus. As we speak, we have designed the protein subunit. We have produced the protein subunit through a partner outside Nigeria, and this protein subunit has been safely expressed through a plasmid in E. coli. We now have a purified express peptide, which was injected into animals in our laboratory, precisely rabbits, sometimes this month, and the animals are being followed up. I believe yesterday we took our first samples to take a look at the ability of the protein subpeptide to evoke an antibody in those animals. That is where we are. The second one, we have indeed grown the virus in our BSL-3 laboratory, and currently we've just received the agent that we hope to use to inactivate or kill the virus, after which we then move into animal experiment. We have been at this for the past 1 year or thereabout, and we seem to be getting out of the wood bit by bit, especially if we are able to get the protein subpeptide or the inactivated virus to evoke antibody production in those animals. Then we'll be able to shout Eureka as it is. So basically, we have designed immunogenic and safe multivalent SARS-CoV-2 viral protein. And of course, we also have used the genetically engineered bacteria, like I said, to express that protein. And we have, on April 14, injected that protein into experimental animals. On the long run, the plans are on the way to provide preclinical safety profile or toxicological assessment for the validated vaccine candidate, and then we can begin to talk about phase 1 and 2 trial. What are the challenges? The challenges is that we do not have the capacity. Generally, when we look at the situation around, and we don't believe that we can put this effort in ourselves. Otherwise, many of the centers in Nigeria by now should be looking at the possibility of this experiment. We have poor infrastructure to support this. Recently, we just acquired an NGS, and we are hoping to get an oligosynthesizer, which is going to be provided to us by MTN Nigeria, that will provide us the capacity to produce and develop primers and probes in Nigeria, so that we don't have to send this outside the country to aid and improve life science research in Nigeria. Much more importantly, there's lack of research funding for vaccine innovators that are not specific. Of recent, the CBN of Nigeria provided funding for researchers to access in the development of vaccines, but CBN limited this to researchers that have already developed what looks like a candidate vaccine, rather than starting from the beginning. And this really cannot help those who are going to start from the beginning. So funds need to be made available from the beginning of development of vaccine to the level of clinical trial. And then the amounts being provided, 50 million, can barely do or support a vaccine development effort, as it were. We depend highly on foreign financing and support. For example, all that we have been doing, we have to design the probes and primers most of the time, design the protein subunit, and then start to look for experts outside to produce that and then send it back to us. Especially during the lockdown, where planes are not flying, sometimes many of the things that we have designed that we are expecting takes many more weeks to get to us. Sometimes they have been denatured, and then when we use them and they are not providing result, then we start all over again. This has been causing a lot of delay in making progress with vaccine research. And then, of course, lack of synergy between academia, industry, government, and agencies. I believe what COVID-19 pandemic has done of recent is to open up these weak areas. And industries and academia and government have realized the need to work together to be able to conquer some of these emerging diseases that are breaking out from time to time in Africa. And then, of course, the issue of procurement and regulatory roadblocks when you are trying to get materials to develop vaccine. These are the opportunities for vaccine development as it's known now. And then, of course, we know about the RNA, the DNA, the protein subunit, the live attenuated. African countries can key into the recombinant method or the inactivated virus method, which is used even during this pandemic by India and other countries. We can start from there. And then, of course, industry and academia partnership needs to be strong. We can also join vaccine manufacturing from maybe one of three areas to begin having our own experience. We can at least look at packaging and distribution, storage, so that when we do have the opportunity, there will be facilities to do all of this. So we can join the formulation and fillings, and then when we have all the experience, we can begin to talk about antigen manufacturing to improve vaccine production in Africa. We need, therefore, to see what we can do with CEPI, which is a coalition for epidemic preparedness innovation. It's a global partnership that countries can leverage on. And I believe these are the people that are talking about vaccine equity in the current pandemic, where none of African countries is able to produce its own vaccine, and yet we need to have vaccination of our people. We are working currently with two other institutions in Nigeria, the Utumanu Danfodio University and the National Veterinary Research Institute. The National Veterinary Research Institute has been producing vaccines for animals for many years, and they are still doing that. And so we hope to leverage on that experience to start vaccine development and production in Nigeria for human. The Utumanu Danfodio University is thinking about DNA vaccines, and we are looking at subunit vaccines. And between the three institutions, we've turned to TET Fund, which is the only funding agencies for tertiary institutions in Nigeria now, to support this group to begin the process of developing vaccine and producing vaccine in Nigeria using the experience of the National Veterinary Research Institute. And I'm going to finish very soon. The last bit is our ability to acquire a next generation sequencer from the fund provided by the federal government, the COVID-19 Intervention Fund, perhaps one of the best things that has happened to our institution in recent times. And we are able to procure an automated library prep, in robotic, and the DNB G50 massive parallel sequencing machine, which was installed about 6 weeks ago. And you could see the setup here and then the training. With this, we are able to assist the NCDC in genomic surveillance and do a lot more of research, determining etiology or the opportunity of finding a target area of the sequencing and targeting it for development of diagnostic kits and possibly drug development. This indeed is a new capacity for our institution, and we are open to collaboration and support from relevant agencies within and outside the country to move this forward. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this has been how my institution and Nigeria in quote has fared during this pandemic. I know that the Honorable Commissioner for Health, when giving his talk, will probably fill in the gaps that I might have missed out. I thank you very much once again for this opportunity to be part of this conversation, to show what we have been able to do and reflect on our gaps and where we require networking, collaboration, and support so that we can move the science forward in Nigeria. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you very much, Prof. We have had a super time listening to you. Like I said, before you got to your space to speak, I had said that it's never a dull moment listening to you. And it's beautiful to know that NIMA has done so much, and NIMA is going to be doing a whole lot more. And so thank you very much for your time. Thank you for making out time for a busy schedule and sharing with us. For those that are listening, it's time for, I will not try to summarize the whole paper at all. What I'm just going to be doing is to highlight a couple of things so that if we have questions, Prof will still be here to be able to respond to them. Like when Professor Mashindo was introducing, he said, Africa is about 1.3 billion, bigger than Europe and America together, and not one vaccine is produced in Africa among the ones that have been given in the world. But listening to Prof this morning has given us some spark of hope that something is happening. And I live in Nigeria. I know that NIMA has done a couple of things with the testing, and now it's a good thing to hear that we're even moving from testing to even planning to get to candidate vaccines and then to move on from there. It's beautiful also to know that funding is quite coming, but researchers are not that many. Well, we are making efforts. We are like a drop in the ocean, but it's good to, I've heard that we are the least, or we are very, very, very insignificant for years. And I hope that with COVID-19, we're going to be making a lot of progress, and we're going to be holding our ground when it comes to research in Africa. It is important also to know that collaboration is taking place. At least we in the university, we talk about taking gown to town. So it's important to know that collaboration is taking place, because without collaboration, really nothing will happen when it comes to drug and manufacturing. So we're grateful that your institute is collaborating with others, and then we're looking forward to making progress when it comes to drug development, and in this context, COVID-19 vaccine development. Prof, I'm going to be throwing this in. You know, a lot of times COVID-19 has made us talk about economy, has made us talk about life, made us talk about future. What about traditional medicine? I know your institute has an aspect that deals with traditional medicine. And I think it is important for us to do a lot of inward looking, searching, retrospect. And I think Africa will be able to make a lot of contribution, because World Health Organization understands the role of traditional medicine. And it's important for us to also begin to look at what has been done by people with regards to health and care. So it's time for us now to ask questions. If we have questions, you can just send your question to the question and answer group. If there are questions from those of our participants online, then we can take up the questions, and then we will move on from there. If you have a question, you can raise up your hand, send your chat. Can I just ask that we mute our microphones if we don't have the ground, please? Thank you very much. So, Prof, while we wait for questions, could you just give us some insight into prospects in traditional medicine and possibilities of developing vaccine that will be traditional medicine based?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Tiko. Traditional medicine has really featured prominently in Nigeria when it comes to trying to manage COVID-19 within the community. And there were a lot of herbal remedies that were put forward either to my institute or to the traditional complementary and alternative medicine department at the Federal Ministry of Health, where in fact during the first wave was a virtual meeting held by the Honorable Minister and a committee put together to look at the claims of these traditional herbal practitioners. And many of the claims, as I speak, may be with the NAFDAC for listening, because we have to start from safety before we start talking about efficacy and tolerability, as it were. So that is the best I remember about the effort of the Federal Ministry of Health in harnessing the power and capacity of traditional healers in the treatment of COVID-19. As you know, during the pandemic, there are standard therapies, even though there were no clear-cut cure. And so it became very challenging to leave standard therapy and give people herbal preparation that has not been gone through safety profile by NAFDAC. And I believe this was one of the things that was delaying trying any of them in any clinical trials. And what more importantly is funding to support such clinical trials are not available either from the traditional herbal practitioners themselves or from government. The only one we got from the presidency was through the Federal Ministry of Health was the one developed in Madagascar, which was sent to our institute for safety profile, and which we did and really found it safe, but we couldn't go ahead to do a clinical trial on it for lack of support for funding. But our researchers did what they call docking, which showed that there is some evidence that the Madagascar herb could do or did or may have some effect on the virus. But these are really much more computational than the real life. It's only provided evidence that we can go ahead and test it in people, but then there was no support for that. There was also another local herb that was also put through docking that also showed some promise in the treatment of COVID-19, but none of them were we able to take through clinical trial. But there is no doubt there are myriads and myriads of traditional preparations that people are using in the community during the wave of the first wave, much more than the second wave. Over.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. I see in the, okay, now questions are coming in the question section. The first one the first one is also in the line of alternative. This Nomalanga says, can Prof comment on the studies we see on use of beta-cola specifically? And then there's a second question. It says, I would like Prof to explain how his center influenced some of the decisions of NCDC, especially on testing capacity and testing fees. For instance, the testing fee of 50,000 Naira is not only exorbitant, but a deliberate exclusion of the poor. I know NIMA does free tests, but I know other private laboratories charge 50 and above thousand. So Prof, someone is asking, what is your institute doing to influence NCDC in some of its decisions? There's a third question, but after responding to these two, I'll come up with a third question.
Okay, thank you once again. The issue of bitter cola has been in the scientific news many years back as an anti-inflammatory, and there were also insinuations that it also has some antiviral properties. And I believe that it is because of these two properties that are prominent with the agent that people insinuated that it could be used for COVID-19. I remember sometimes we were also insinuating that they could use it for Ebola or thereabout. But this has not been clearly proven. But because of those properties, there may be some advantages in chewing one or two or so to support the immune system within the body. But as for a clear-cut antiviral property, I am not too sure that we have evidence, important evidence for that. Now, for NCDC testing, we are a government agency, and we all answer to the same principle, which is the Federal Ministry of Health. And whatever NCDC does comes from the Federal Ministry of Health or from Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. And there was no time the NCDC took money for testing. All laboratories supported by NCDC did free testing or are supposed to be doing free testing. So if any of the laboratories took money, that is against the principle of the NCDC or that of the Federal Ministry of Health. However, because there were not enough laboratories and government alone cannot shoulder that responsibilities, government decided to open up testing to private facilities. And many of these private facilities were actually visited by NCDC to confirm their readiness and their capacity and ability to provide the tests and provide results that are dependable, so to speak. And between them and government, I believe they came up with this cost, which is the cheapest that they can come up, because doing a test requires that you use an RNA extraction kit and you use a detection kit, amongst other things. And these things are not produced in Nigeria until we came up with our own. So you can imagine how much would have been used to import those things. That is how they came about this 50K that the large majority of people are paying. However, we have a center since March 30th, is still running as I speak, and is doing free testing for people who are within the criteria for testing. I think lately we have made it more liberal. Anyone who wants to be tested just needs to register and then they get tested. So we cannot really tell the NCDC on how much people should charge, but we are making effort to ensure that the NCDC prescribe our diagnostic kit and our RNA kit, which are made in Nigeria and have been shown to be very efficacious with significant specificity and sensitivity. And if this could be done and produce en masse, the cost of tests certainly will have to come down. I believe I've answered the two questions.
Yes, Prof. Thank you very, very much. Now I have two other questions here. I'm just going to paraphrase the third question. Basically, the person affirms that COVID-19 is real and that what you have said about testing may be limited to Lagos because there are some parts of Nigeria where you do not have testing for COVID-19. And the person cited Ondo State as an example. And he says, what is your agency doing about that? He says he knows no test is conducted. I know of family and friend who said there is no test center in Ondo State. So that's the third question. The fourth question is, Prof mentioned that a SARS-CoV-2 strain was discovered in some 2016 test. What is happening to other scientific discoveries and how can they help us anticipate future outbreak and therefore prepare for them adequately? So if you respond to those other two questions, then we would have exhausted our time for sessions unless there's okay, I see a hand being raised, Akinpelu. Once Prof finishes with these questions, then you can unmute and ask your questions. Thank you very much, Prof. Over to you.
Thank you very much once again. I'm not sure that statement about Ondo State is true because I'm aware that Ondo State established its own molecular diagnostic center, and researchers from my institute recently with Co-Creation Hub, an IT outfit, were in Ondo State for 2 weeks training some organizations on how to establish a kind of testing outfit that we have in Naima. And they stayed there for 2 weeks and trained people. So if they don't have lab, I don't think they will be trained. And this was in conjunction with Ondo State government. So the only thing is that the testing centers are not enough, or labs are not enough, because that probably is the only one center in Ondo State, which means in other local government areas in Ondo State, you may not have a testing center, and people may have to be taking their samples to the only one to get tested. That will delay decision-making in terms of management, and then, of course, possibly outcome of the patient himself or self. But Ondo State certainly has a testing center or lab. Now, this SARS-CoV that I was talking about was not SARS-CoV-2, but a SARS-CoV-1 in quotes, which was a coronavirus seen in camel and in bats at the time. And of course, they were not in humans, so they didn't create any human illness. But they were sequenced and were noted at the time. So when we were trying to create a genetic tree for the ones that we sequenced, we found out that this has happened even in Nigeria. So coronavirus of this nature, the idea was that to say that coronavirus of SARS nature had been found in bats and in camel in Nigeria before. That was the import of that phylogenetic tree and the statement that I made. But how do we mitigate for this animal to man disease? I think, again, one thing that the pandemic has brought about is a need to look at human health from one health issue, because virtually all the emerging viral diseases that we have seen have come from zoonotic origin. And therefore, there is a strong need that researchers must begin to think beyond humans alone when we are looking at origin of diseases, or we are trying to find solutions to diseases in terms of epidemiology, diagnosis, and treatment, that we look at it from the prism of One Health. And so we can ensure that we're looking at animals, we're looking at agricultural products, issues, and even when we talk about herbs and all of that, we look at agricultural products, a kind of a holistic approach to finding solution to some of the pandemics that we have experienced and that we will experience in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. So I would now ask, I see a second hand raised, but I had asked that Akipelu would ask his question. You can now unmute. And just to remind you that this session is being recorded, so you can unmute and ask your question. And then I see another hand, James Kambiza. You also can do a follow-up and ask your questions. We'll take those two questions and then the session will end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akinchiko. It's my pleasure to be on this insightful discussion. And my question goes to Professor Salako. I enjoyed his presentation on the efforts NIMA is taking in vaccine production. But what I seems not to be speaking in his presentation is the effort at collaborating with other African countries towards production of vaccine. Like Dr. Otiko earlier said, while making a submission, that talking about the population of Africa in comparison with Europe, we can say that there is need for a kind of collaboration beyond the shore of Nigeria with other African countries towards vaccine production. So we want to ask Prof that what is being done in that end. For instance, how is Nigeria collaborating with South Africa or any other African countries towards putting their resources together to make vaccine available for Africans? That is the first one. The second one is I just want a follow-up on Prof's information that he gave regarding the safety protocol NIMA took on the Madagascar product. That can we have a kind of a link to a publication about the viability of that product so that we can have a reference we can make about that as well? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. James Gambiza unmute and ask your question so Prof can take the two questions at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Great talk, Professor. First, I would like to reiterate the comment which you made as one of the challenges, that we don't trust in our own abilities. I think we need to change that discourse. There's some excellent science coming from Africa. We don't need other people to legitimize us. My specific question, Prof, relates to one of the key slides which you showed. How can African researchers move from collaborators to principal researchers so that we don't dance to someone else's tune? Thank you very much.
Am I on?
Yes, please, Prof. Thank you very much. So we have you respond to those questions.
Good. Let me start from the latter. How can African researchers become or come to the front rather than receiving the crumbs? One, I believe that we need to look at our researchers in terms of training, much more importantly, research training, PhDs and MDs and our government providing funds to support research locally and training locally. Because for us to be able to compete effectively with other countries of the world, we need to have experience and we need to have the knowledge. And this we cannot get without our government support. There are not many African countries that are spending up to 1% of the GDP on research. And because we depend on foreign funding, we sometimes, it's not all the research calls that are available to African PIs. Even some of them that are available to African PIs, initiatives are taken off them by the high country PIs, and then African PIs are made the PI, but they don't have the idea, or the idea is not theirs. This has happened a few times. And it is mainly because giving grant goes beyond just writing the correct science. The funder is also interested in safety of its fund. The country or continent is filled with all sorts of conflicts and wars. That kind of situation does not encourage funders to give direct funding to African researchers. And so they put the money where the fund is safe, and that it has to be with them. These are some of the non-scientific reasons why we do not get a direct award from some of the funders. Oftentimes, even when it's coming, they ask African scientists to look for collaborators in the West to be able to apply for such grants sometimes. So the situation at home is also contributing negatively to our ability to get this direct grant, even though we know the science and we know how to put some of these things together in some situations. But because of the prevailing situation at home, sometimes lack of electricity for storage sample, lack of robust database to keep data, and then most of our data are kept with them rather than with us. Those are issues that goes beyond the scientific knowledge that African researchers need to have. These are governmental issues, societal issues that are difficult to put right at a go. So we need to continue advocacy to our government to let them know that science and development, or research and development, go together, and that if a country does not invest in research, then that country is not likely to develop. And unless we are able to put this across to people at the helm of affairs, the decision makers in our countries, and get the buy-in from them, some of these other factors may continue to linger on and deprive African researchers that pride place to get direct grant and be in the front of innovations and discovery in Africa. I believe it's a long-term thing, but we can start now, and hopefully in the next few years to come, the narratives may change. Now, the Madagascar agents that we studied was for both acute and chronic toxicity. I think it's been sent to a paper for publication. It's probably going through an assessment now, so it's not been published yet. It's something that we did about 5 months ago, and we had to turn in the report to the Federal Ministry of Health and the PTF that sent them to us before we started the process of publication. I don't have the updates now where it is, but certainly I can provide information on it if we have it. Now, collaboration with other African countries. Unfortunately, this pandemic was what made us to realize that we can't at all go into vaccine development. And I must confess that at the beginning of the pandemic, as the leadership of the Institute, people ask me, what is your institution doing about vaccine production? What is your institution doing about diagnosis and all of that? Even though we didn't have specific dedicated fund for it, the embarrassing nature of such questions and the fact that we are not able to provide answers to those questions led us to sit down and then put our heads together and ask ourselves, what do we even need to be able to start something, whether successful or not successful? But what do we even need? And then we discovered that most of the things that we may need, we can get, some locally, some from abroad. And that's how we started to get to where we are. Ordinarily, the answers would have been, oh, it's vaccine production, it's as big as rocket science, as far as Africa is concerned, and that we cannot do it. But we realized that even one of our veterinary institutions has been involved in vaccine production for many years, and they are still doing it for animals. So we got our strength from such information, and then we started working on our own idea, and we then initiated the coming together of the three institutions that I mentioned to see if we can then be the platform in Nigeria to establish vaccine development research as a group or a consortium looking for funds from government. And I believe this would be a platform through which, if we are well seated, we can work with other African countries. Already we have linkage with some of the African research institutes like the South African Medical Research Council. We're working with them. We have 2 grants between us, and we visited the place, although we haven't discussed the issue of vaccine. But I think this is an eye-opener, and that we can begin to link with these other people. I must also say that we're also working with the Institute Pasteur because they produce yellow fever vaccine. We visited them, and those are the areas where we got our strength to think that we also can put our hands in development of vaccine, at least within the lab arena, before we get to clinical trial. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Prof. I allowed us to go slightly beyond our time because your contributions are very vital and significant. On behalf of the organizers and Professor Mashindo, I'd like to give a big applause and thanks for giving your time, giving us some resources and the data. It gives us some hope that Africa, we're not there, but we can get there. We hope to get there. Thank you very much, Prof. Right about now, we will be ending the first session, and COVID-19 has done us a lot of good as well. Now we can do a lot of virtual conferencing, colloquium, and moderation from different places. I just want to once again thank all those that have been here, participants. I see Director for the Institute of African Diaspora Study, Professor Muyiwa Falaye also online. So I thank you all. Another thing COVID-19 has taught us is to exercise. So right about now, we're going to straighten out our legs, get some fresh air, and then we're supposed to have had a 20-minute break. But because of the value, the beauty of the first session, we're going to have a 5-minute break. So we have our next session starting South African time, 11:45, but Nigerian time, 10:45. So in the next 5 minutes, we'll be back with our next speaker. But right now, I'd ask that you just take some time off, stretch your legs, and get some breather, and then we will be back for our next lecture. Thank you very much for being a participant. Please, either you go and come back or you just stay online. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I gave you 5 extra minutes because I realized that 5 minutes out of 25 minutes was not going to be enough. We welcome you to the next session for today's colloquium. And to this session, we're supposed to have Dr. Mohammed Abdulaziz. He's the head Disease Control and Prevention, African Cdc, Addis Ababa. I'd like to talk about and to listen to head of disease control centers in Africa. With COVID-19, many did not even know there was anything like CDC in Nigeria and CDC. We didn't know all of this. And then it was when the protocols for COVID-19 came about. And then in Nigeria, we had a presidential task force for COVID-19. And there, the head of NCDC would always come and speak to us. So with that, Nigerians came to know that there was even anything like NCDC. So it's always a pleasure to have heads or representatives of Centers for Disease Control come speak to us. And today it is important, and I'm so delighted that we're going to be listening to another head, another director of Center for Disease Control. And so in no guise, in no mean, we're going to be welcoming Dr. Mohammed Abdulaziz. I would like to have us listen. And like I said at the beginning, the session is going to be recorded. And during the discussion session, if you don't want your contributions recorded, please let us know. And if you're not going to be making any contribution, please mute your mic so we'll have a seamless lecture. So Doctor, you're welcome. The floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent. I was having a little technical issue putting it up, but thank God I'm used to Zoom more than this document, but it's okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the participants of this webinar, depending on which area you are based in. This morning, I will be taking you through the epidemiologic situation and lessons learned from the Africa Cdc response to COVID-19. The world is still experiencing an upward trend in new cases, driven by the Southeast Asia region in purple. Sorry, let me learn how to change my slide. Okay. So this slide is showing you the global picture as it is this morning. We are still having an upward trend in new cases driven by Southeast Asia region, which is in purple, but with significant contribution to case counts from Europe and America region, shown by the green and yellow bars respectively in the epic curve. As at 3:57 p.m. Yesterday, we have over 141 million cases and over 3 million deaths have been reported globally with a case fatality rate of 2.1%. So going to the next slide. Looking at the epidemiological situation in Africa, all the 55 member states of the AU have been affected. However, we do not have current information for one member state. 45 member states have reported 100,000 cases or less. The epic curve on the right is showing the number of new cases on y-axis reported by day, and by day on the x-axis. The red line, which is the 7-day moving average, shows a slight decrease in the number of new cases reported. As of today, over 4.4 million cases have been reported in Africa, with over 115,000 deaths, resulting in a case fatality rate of 2.7. Of the cases reported, 90% have recovered. So this table is showing the distribution of COVID-19 deaths and recovery by AU regions. As of 21st April 2021, over 5,900 new cases with 270 new deaths were reported, with 9,300 new recoveries from all the 55 member states. 38% of the new cases have been reported from Eastern region, and majority of the new deaths and recovery reported from the Southern region. Cumulatively, most of the cases have been reported from the Southern region of Africa. This chart is showing the number of new COVID-19 cases on the y-axis, reported by week on the x-axis. For the past 4 weeks, the red line shows the trend in the percentage change of new COVID-19 cases reported by week in Africa. Over the past 4 weeks, on the average, new COVID-19 cases are increasing by 1% each week. Looking specifically at the regions, when we say the regions of Africa, we mean Central Africa region, Eastern Africa region, Northern Africa region, Southern and Western Africa region. Looking specifically at the region, each chart represents the number of new COVID-19 cases on the y-axis, reported by week on the x-axis for the past 4 weeks. Across all the charts, the scale has been kept the same. The red and black line shows the trend in percentage change of new COVID-19 cases by week. By region, you will see that 12%, we have a 12% increase in Northern African region in the past 4 weeks, 3% increase in the Eastern region, 6% decrease in Central Africa region, 2% decrease in Southern region, and 13% decrease in Western region. Having reviewed the continental and regional trend, we are also closely monitoring country trends. On this slide is highlighted the countries that are currently experiencing a sustained upward trend in the number of new cases being reported in the past 4 weeks. 10 countries, namely Angola, Madagascar, Ethiopia, Djibouti, Central African Republic, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Sadr, and Mali are currently experiencing a sustained upward trend in new COVID-19 cases, as you can see on your screen. The next 2 slides will bring into focus the new deaths reported over the past 4 weeks for Africa and for each of the AU regions. This chart is showing the number of new COVID-19 deaths on the y-axis reported by week on the x-axis for the past 4 weeks. The red line shows the trend in percentage change of new COVID-19 deaths by week in Africa. The message here is that over the past 4 weeks, there has been on average a 1% decrease in the number of new deaths being reported each week for the continent. Similarly, the panel on this slide shows the number of new COVID-19 deaths on the y-axis and reported by week on the x-axis by region for the past 4 weeks. Across all the charts, the scale has been kept the same. So you will see that there has been a 16% increase in the Eastern African region, 9% increase in the Northern region, 26% decrease in Central region, 13% decrease in Southern region, and 30% decrease in Western region. This slide is showing the incidence per 1 million population per day for all the African Union member states. As epidemiologists, it's good to show cases by per population so that we know where the burden really is. So in the past epidemiological week, 27 countries reported less than 5 new cases per day. 16 countries reported between 5 to 50 new cases per day per 1 million population. 4 countries reported between 51 and 100 new cases per day per 1 million population, while 4 countries, that's Cape Verde, Eswatini, Seychelles, and Tunisia, are still reporting more than 100 new cases per million per day. This week, we do not have information for 4 member states. So similarly for case fatality rate, on this slide, we have categorized the case fatality rate for AU member states into 5 groups. The map on the right shows how each of the countries have been categorized. 10 countries have a case fatality rate that is less or equal to 1%, shown by the green color. So in West Africa, you will see that we have Cote d'Ivoire, we have Ghana, and Burkina Faso, I think in this, no, not Burkina Faso. Anyway, I can see Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana in this category. Then 23 countries have a case fatality rate that is between 1 to 2.2%, shown by yellow color, where Nigeria is in that group. 18 countries have a case fatality rate that is between 2.2 and 5%. These are shaded in red. South Africa is in that group. The dark red color shows the 4 countries: Egypt, Sahrawi Republic, Somalia, and Sudan, that have a case fatality rate that is greater than 5%. The chart on this slide is showing the number of new SARS-CoV-2 tests. And now we are trying to look at how Africa has been doing its testing so that we know whether we are testing enough or not. We can see that just under 1 million tests are conducted every week across the continent, and the positivity rate is still consistently above 5%. Since February last year, over 42 million tests have been conducted across the continent, and the overall test per case ratio and test positivity are 9.6 and 10.4 respectively. This slide shows the test positivity by AU member state for the past epidemiological week. That's the past week. 9 countries have tested test positivity less than or equal to 2%. And these are shown in green. 18 countries in yellow have test positivity greater than 2 to 7%. And 1 country has test positivity above 7 to 10%. So let's look at in more detail the Western region of Africa. We are seeing generally a downward trend in new cases being reported every week. To the left, the chart is showing the number of new COVID-19 cases reported by week for the past 4 weeks. The red line shows the trend in the percentage change of new COVID-19 cases by week. Over the past 4 weeks, on average, there has been a 13% decrease in the number of new cases being reported each week from the Western African region. In the past epi week, more than 5,400 new cases were reported, with Cape Verde, Mali, and Togo accounting for 58% of these cases. For the Western region today, we will, I deleted that so as to save time. Now let's go to Central Africa and see what trends we are getting from Central Africa. In Central Africa region, we are also seeing a downward trend in new cases being reported every week. To the left, the chart is showing the number of new COVID-19 cases reported by week for the past 4 weeks. The red line shows the trend in the percentage change of the new COVID-19 cases by week. Over the past 4 weeks, on the average, there has been a 6% decrease in the number of new cases being reported each week for the region. In the past epi week, more than 2,600 new cases were reported in Central Africa. Gabon, Burundi, and Central African Republic accounted for 81% of these cases. For today, we will not look at it because of to reduce the number of slides for this presentation. However, all of this data that I have presented is good for the distinguished members, participants of this panel to know a little about Africa Cdc. Africa Cdc is an African-owned institution. And all the data I gave earlier on the epidemiology of COVID-19 was developed by this institution. This institution was promulgated into being by our head of states in 2017 in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And the mandate of the Africa Cdc is very simple: to build the public health response capacity of member states of the continent. The headquarters of Africa CDC is situated where I'm talking to you from, that is Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. But we have regional collaborating centers in all the regions of Africa. That of Northern Africa is situated in Cairo in Egypt. That of Central Africa is situated in Libreville, Gabon. That of East Africa is situated in Nairobi, Kenya. That of West Africa is situated in Nigeria, Abuja, Nigeria. And that of Southern Africa is situated in Lusaka, Zambia. We recently launched the RCC into operation for that of Lusaka, where we had the vice president of that country, Zambia, in that event. So we in Africa CDC also are linked to the national, what we call the national public health institutions. So you will see that in Nigeria, we work very closely with Nigerian CDC. In Liberia, we work very closely with Liberian National Public Health Institute. In Zambia, we work very closely with the Zambian National Public Health Institute. And in South Africa, we work with the NICD in South Africa. So this is the operating model for Africa CDC. We currently have 5 strategic plans, which is for 2017 to 2021. I'm actually not, we are currently on a retreat to develop that of 2022-2026 work plan, because the current work plan we're working with will end this year. So that's why I'm not actually calling, answering this call from the office. I'm answering from the venue of the retreat. So this initial strategic plan that we've been working with in the past 5 years include the surveillance and disease intelligence, emergency preparedness and response, laboratory system and network, information systems, national public health institutes, and research. And what you see at the base, holding firm the building called Africa CDC, is the enablers: finance, leadership, management, partnership, governance, and innovation. So since the onset of COVID-19, what has Africa CDC done? We established the task force for coronavirus, a continental task force that is mandated with coordinating all the response for COVID-19 from the continent point of view. And this was requested by our head of state, and the ministers of health endorsed it. So we are leading that strategy. In doing that, we've set up 6 technical working groups for surveillance and enhanced point of entry screening, clinical care, infection prevention and control, supply chain and stockpile, laboratory diagnostic and subtyping, risk communication and community engagement. So the near-term goals then that was about this time last year, was to for member state to capacitate the member state and train them in surveillance, labs, IPC care, and risk communication. So we had 3 goals. First is preventing transmission, which required enhanced surveillance, and of course, probably vaccines that are coming now. Preventing deaths. Our mandate was to prevent deaths from COVID-19 and prevent social and economic harm. You agree with me that because of some of the response to COVID-19, we had some social and economic harm, but one of the mandates of Africa CDC is to minimize that as much as possible. So in doing all of what I've said above, we set up the partnership to accelerate COVID testing. We understood that for us to be able to respond to COVID-19, the countries in Africa must have the capacity to diagnose COVID-19. And I can tell you, at the onset of by January 2020, no country in Africa has the diagnostic capacity to make a diagnosis of COVID-19. By February, Senegal and South Africa had that capacity. And that was when Africa CDC set into motion. It was not acceptable that only 2 countries in our continent could make a diagnosis of COVID-19. So between February and August, in a deliberative way, combination of training, supporting member states with test kits and reagents and supplies, we were able to get all the 55 member states on the continent to be able to make a diagnosis of COVID-19. That was one area that we really had to work very quickly, because we realized that it would not work for countries to ship sample because of the lockdown. So we had to ensure, and before August 2020, all the 55 member states of Africa, including Nigeria and South Africa was already there, were able to make a diagnosis of COVID-19. We did not stop there. We supported countries to not only have that capacity, but step it down to subnational level. Like for Nigeria, step it down to different states. So, and we continue to supply the reagent and test kits that is necessary to be able to make a diagnosis of COVID-19 for all the member states on the continent. So what did PATH strategy achieve at that time? We initially said we wanted countries by August to be able to make, by October, we wanted the total number of tests to be done in Africa to be more than 10 million. But by August that year, we hit that target. And we set another goal for 20 million. And by October, over 30 million tests have been conducted on the continent. And don't forget that for COVID-19, unless you are able to test and know the results of that person, then you cannot do anything. So that was very key to ensuring an adequate response on the continent. We set a target to deploy community health workers and also train community health workers, and also to be able to ensure that the African countries continue to be able to respond to COVID-19, but without running out of supplies. This is very key. Don't forget that economies closed down. There was no international travel. So we had to think of ingenious way to ensure that countries continue to be supplied with test kits, with infection prevention and control materials and other equipments that are necessary for the control of COVID-19. So we realized that we needed, because COVID-19 is new, and the knowledge aspect of it was fast evolving. So we have to support countries with rapid responders. I'm happy to tell you that we were able to support 22 countries, and up to now we have over 200 rapid responders in all of these countries you are seeing, helping those countries to respond to COVID-19. We did not just stop with the rapid responders are epidemiologists, high-level public health experts. However, we realized that we need to go to the community level to be able to make appreciable impact. So as I'm speaking to you, this is an outdated slide. We have over 17,000 community health workers that we've deployed to more than 21 countries on the continent, as shown on your screen. We also supported surveillance, infection prevention and control training. The numbers you are seeing are the numbers of people we train as at October. These numbers have increased remarkably. We supported case management, laboratory, risk communication, and public health emergency operation center that is responsible for coordinating the response to COVID-19. Okay, we've seen this before, earlier on. So, like I said, these are some of the things we did. Sorry. Oh, okay, I was going back. Very importantly, we supported member states with, as you might have noticed, COVID was fast evolving. In fact, at a point in time, by the time we were finishing a guideline before you put it on the website or before you disseminate it to the member state, we needed to amend it because of the way the evidence, the science behind it was changing rapidly. So we were able to really keep up to pace and supported member states with up-to-date scientific-based backed guidelines on surveillance, laboratory, IPC, and case management, and many more. So distinguished participants of this meeting, what were the lessons learned from all of this? I've said all of this COVID-19 response. Our distinguished head of state, President Paul Kagame, said, the difference between success and failure lies in building a robust public health infrastructure that can confront any health issue in a sustainable manner. Solid health system combined with transformational partnership are critical. We've learned a big lesson. And that big lesson is that we must have institutions, public health institutions. And we must support these public health institutions so that they can learn, so that they can lead in the event of outbreaks and pandemic. Therefore, a national public health institute of the future should focus on both universal health coverage and global health security agenda. Should attend to non-communicable diseases, neglected tropical and other endemic diseases, but very importantly, institutions like NCDC should be able to work with partners, build the local capacity for therapeutics, vaccines, PPEs, and diagnostics. They should be adequately funded and, of course, be able to work with partners. So, where are we with this? 15 member states have functioning MPHIs. As you can see, Nigeria is among them. We have NCDC. South Africa has a functioning MPHI. Liberia has. Algeria, Ethiopia has Ethiopian Public Health Institute, EPHI. However, we still have quite a number of countries that are not yet there. Those that are there are in green, you can see. Those that are not yet there, still need more engagement, are in red. So these National Public Health Institutes are able to take leadership, just like NCDC was able to take leadership in this COVID-19, and we owe NCDC a great deal of gratitude. Therefore, Africa CDC is working very, very, very assiduously to ensure that every single African member state have National Public Health Institute. We've developed frameworks for development of these MPHIs. We have legal frameworks to help them. And very importantly, we've developed monitoring scorecard to help identify gaps and advocate that for this public health institute to show them area of that require improvement. The second lesson we've learned is that we need to have regional networks. We need to have regional networks. So in Africa CDC, what we're doing is we're promoting regional networks for North, for West, for East, for Central and Southern Africa, and then combine these networks together to now have a continental network. So what we call that is called RISNet, Regional Integrated Surveillance and Laboratory Network. And we are already piloting in Central Africa, where we're supporting laboratory workforce and partnerships. So for accelerated regional disease detection and response, we expect the regional networks to have to strengthen innovative data and experience sharing platform. Cross-border specimen referral system is not, we cannot say we'll do for COVID what we do all the time for all the infectious diseases. And again, it's not possible for us to be able to strengthen every country to respond to every emerging infectious disease. However, we can set up referral systems in which if NCDC have a world-class lab, we can ask countries like neighboring Nigeria to send samples, and then we help them test it and give them results in good time to respond to their outbreaks. So these are some of the things we are doing for the region. Importantly, ladies and gentlemen, is that we've learned that no matter how much we are pressed by responding to outbreak, we must ensure that humanitarian corridors are left open. Because at a point in time, we were almost crippled in our response, continental response, because all humanitarian corridors were blocked. Countries were running out of emergency supplies, laboratory test kits, infection prevention and control materials. Africa CDC had, working with Ethiopian government, have to deploy Ethiopian airline to supply African countries all over with all of these materials. And we were able to, working with the Peace and Security Council of the African Union Commission, deploy some of these military planes to move responders around the continent, especially responders that were critically needed in different countries of the continent. So what again did we learn? We learned that Africans should use the pool purchasing power. We've had experience with it in Africa where Gavi will pool purchase vaccines. We should use that in other things, because if we leave countries individually to go and purchase vaccines or to go and purchase IPC material, laboratory, you will be at the mercy of the manufacturers and middlemen. But if we have a platform where countries can come and do pool purchase of some of these critically important logistics and consumables, then it will be cheaper for countries. In Africa CDC set up the African Medicine Supply Platform, which we use, and countries key into it. They were able to get IPC materials, get vaccines. They are now IPC material and get laboratory equipment and consumables, and really kept their response open. So we depend in Africa totally on imported materials. And that's why you could see all the problems we faced earlier. Let's look at this chart ourselves. Here, India depends only 6% on imported, while they produce 94%. China only 19%. They locally produce 81%. Ghana, on the other hand, imports 70%. Therefore, when the lockdown happens, 70% of what Ghana is getting for supplies of critical medical equipment were cut off. The same for Kenya. Nigeria is even worse, 75%. Ethiopia, 85%. Uganda, 90%. So meaning once there is a disruption in the global supply chain, 90% of critical equipment needed by Uganda will be cut down. Therefore, we need to support local production of all of these on the continent of Africa. So again, we need to ensure that our response, we use what we have to respond. Meaning we cannot be expecting people to send epidemiologists that you pay $5,000 per month or $3,000 per month to respond. We have community health workers. So let's use our existing health system as much as possible to respond to outbreaks such as COVID-19. When the pandemic struck, nobody could come to the aid of Africa except Africans, because every other country was struggling. China was struggling. The United States, they were even struggling more than we were struggling. So issue of getting any help was out of the game. So we need, moving forward, to depend on our existing health system, build a situation in which our existing health system can be used to respond to our emergencies. So in this regard, Africa CDC is supporting critically community health worker use to respond to emergency, because we believe it is a sustainable way of responding than sending an epidemiologist to a local government in Nigeria, for instance, when a community health worker can do most of those work. So this is some of what we are preaching, some of what we are doing. And I'm happy to say that we are in Nigeria right now, we are supporting more than 1,000 community health workers in all the states, I think, except one, Kogi State, in the response to COVID-19. However, in the continent, we have over 17,000 community health workers supporting this COVID-19 response. And in so doing, we are showing countries that you can use your existing health system to respond to emergencies, outbreaks, public health events. And this way, you will both be strengthening your health system and at the same time ensuring that you are saving money, actually. So I'm getting to the end of the presentation. We also know that we had to support countries with challenges with their health system, countries in conflict like Somalia, because in Africa, we believe that we are only as good as our weakest link. If we don't support them, we will still end up being in trouble in the whole continent. Again, we've learned that we need to pay attention to saving not just life, but economies and livelihood. So that is why what you'll be hearing more and more from Africa CDC is how to ensure that we safely reopen our economy, our countries, our people can safely move around through trusted travel policies, so much so that we don't need to continue to lock ourselves down. In Africa, this has very serious implications because a significant proportion of our population depend on what they do today to feed today. This is critical. Therefore, we need to continue to ensure that they are able to do that in the safest available way without increasing the number of cases. And at the same time, we do not derail the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, which talk of free trade, open borders. The only way to do that is to have trusted travel. People should be able to move around, knowing fully well that they are not going to take COVID to their host country. And when they are returning back to their country, they will not bring COVID-19. So that is why some of the policies you've seen in different countries is based because of this. And we're working very hard to ensure that we improve the process and minimize harm as much as possible. Thank you very much. And I'm willing to take any question from the participants. Over to the presenters.
Thank you very, very much. It's been very good listening to you, and it gives us some confidence that Africa Union is doing a lot of work. And I hope we have some questions. Again, I'm not going to try to summarize everything, but it's good to note that from your data, that 90% of those that were infected by COVID-19 recovered. And that leads us to ask that question: what is it that we're doing right? What are we doing properly? How come we have high rate of recovery? And then it's also good to note that during your presentation, you also mentioned, even though the set goal was 10 million vaccination, but we hope by October will be 20 million vaccinated. But I'm asking, 20 million out of 1.3 billion on a continent. So it's good for us to note.
No, we were talking about testing. Well, I will respond to the vaccination when you give me the floor.
Okay, all right. Okay.
It was testing. So, that figure was for testing. Yeah.
For testing. Okay. Then the strategy, the pillars. The last one talks about research. I just want to ask, your research do they include research into traditional medicine? I mean, some of us talk a lot about traditional medicine because we have to look inwards. We have to look inwards to get the best out of all of this that we are doing. And then I was going to ask, but you responded to that, about the fact that 52 country states now have the capacity to test. I know in Nigeria, NIMA locally developed a testing kit. And so that's something we're proud of. I was going to ask how many other countries have locally developed testing kits, because one of the last comments you made, your slides show India and China as the most were two countries that were able to survive quickly because their health importation was not big. And I also think looking at India and China, they also do a lot of local-based traditional medicine, and that's why they as well do not import a lot. So having said all of this, before I open the floor to questions, I'm saying I'm glad the African Union is doing a lot. And also to just drop this in, that there are quite a number, unlike what people have been saying before. When you talk traditional medicine, people think of practitioners alone, but there are quite a number of researchers in traditional medicine, and those need to be engaged more. They do not have to be practitioners, but they also have to be researchers, and that's help. So if you just want to begin to respond to that while I take questions from and comments from others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akin. I really appreciate the way you frame this, and I will try to answer them as it comes. First, let me say we Africa CDC appreciates NIMA. NIMA, we're working with NIMA to do, because as a continental public health institution, we need to continue to use evidence to guide the outbreak or pandemic response. So we're working very closely with NIMA in this regard to do the sero survey in some parts of Nigeria. And we really appreciate what NIMA is doing in Nigeria in terms of responding to this pandemic and ensuring that the Nigerian government gets access to high-level research. So what did you do right? That's a question I've had to answer in every forum I've been on, and this forum also is not different. Well, Dr. Akin, if you remember, in 2013, precisely in Abuja, when our head of states met in Abuja, they issued an Abuja declaration. Then they were concerned about HIV, they were concerned about TB, they were concerned about malaria. And that declaration, I mean, it's amazing how if our political leaders come together, they can be able to think of what can happen in the future. That Abuja declaration was where it was mentioned for the first time, the setting up of a continental public health institution that can help Africa to respond to public health events. However, it did not get any traction until there was the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. And we realized that the response was not handled very well. Let me just say it that way. And people felt maybe if Africans were taking these decisions, things would have been done a little bit better. And that led to the devotion of the whole meeting in Addis Ababa in 2015 by the head of states to the creation of an African-owned public health institution, effectively leading to Africa CDC. And the rest is history. I'm by no means saying that Africa CDC is responsible for the low hits on Africa. However, we did some things that were right. And don't forget that generally Africans are much better in the practical application of disease control measures for infectious diseases. We've been handling infectious diseases on the continent for many, many years. We've just succeeded in eliminating polio from the Africa region, thanks to what the good work they did in Nigeria. We've had Ebola, which is a form of contact, form of infection. We've had measles, we've had several kinds of outbreaks. And because of that, we've had people who are specialized and trained in handling, and therefore our response was much better. Again, we were able to quickly mobilize. African countries were among the very first to lock down and to begin to use social distancing methods to control this outbreak. So we did a lot. there are a lot of ongoing research to see whether there are some constitutive factors. Look at the weather, look at so many other things, but we may not be able to have a definitive answer for a long time to come. Let me quickly jump to vaccinations, because you mentioned it. You see, what the COVAX facility talked about is to get Africa vaccinated, 20% of the population of Africa by the end of this year. However, our head of state, let me say, we really need to give a lot of thanks to the head of state this time around. They've been hands-on approach. The director of Africa CDC has been meeting on average once a month with them, and they've have all years they've contributed. And they told Africa CDC, though we took the proposal, this is not acceptable. 20% is not acceptable because it means we will open our population to continued spread if we say 20% only. Therefore, we set an additional target for us, which is to vaccinate 60% of the population of Africa by 2022. And that is when we can be able to develop herd immunity. Why is this important? It is important because if we allow this thing to continue to spread unhindered in Africa, we stand the chance of having a new variant. And this new variant will spread to even the countries that think they can easily get vaccinated, and we are back to square one. So global health security is about everybody being involved. And that is why the Africa CDC is using the AVAT facility. The AVAT facility seeks to get countries to receive the number of doses of vaccines that will enable them to vaccinate up to 60% of their population. Traditional medicine. If you remember at the beginning of the outbreak, we had different countries coming up with traditionally produced medicine that can that can treat COVID-19. In Africa, CDC, we encourage people to develop, to go to, because in Africa, we love nature, and we know that a lot of our forests and this thing have solutions to some of these emerging infectious diseases. However, we need to subject them to international best practice. We cannot allow something that has been developed that has not gone through, time-honored ways of generating evidence to be administered on our population. We'll be failing in our callings. We expect institutions like NCDC, NIMA, if any person has a traditional medicine, let it go through the process of clinical trials. And mark my words, Africa CDC is supporting clinical trials for any form of traditional medicine. We supported that of Madagascar. I've not seen the report, but we will continue to support traditional medicine. However, it should follow the international best practice. And that way, we can be able to say that these products are not causing harm, and they are very effective in the treatment of what we intended them for. And the issue is that for a disease or infection like COVID-19, which sometimes I've seen series that have talked about up to 80% asymptomatic, you cannot say you've treated COVID-19 with just 100 people that have taken your medication. You need to subject it to time-honored ways of making those kind of inferences. So the testing kits, yes, I know Senegal has produced locally produced test kits, and these test kits, Prof, is not just also to say we produce. We must also subject them to international best practice of ensuring that they have good sensitivity for good specificity. That is, they are picking what they said they will pick, and they are not picking things that are not supposed to be picked and calling it COVID-19. So these are some of the things that needs to be done. And I believe if we continue, just 2 weeks ago, there was a big international conference that was attended by 5 heads of state, the president of South Africa, president of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that is the chair of the African Union Commission right now, president of Senegal, and 2 other presidents, with over 40,000 people attending. The sole aim of that conference is how do we boost local manufacturing of vaccines on the continent. So this is what, not just vaccines and other consumables. So we need to continue to work in that regard. Like you rightly said, a country like China produces almost all what it needs, so it could respond very quickly to the COVID-19, and it's never had issues of shortfalls. It's even using the Jacmal distance to send to many other countries. So for the test kits, I know Senegal is producing. I have had, is it Morocco in Northern Africa? I'm not very sure now. So some countries are producing, but again, like we say, we have to ensure that they subject them to validation. It has to be validated to be so that we are sure that those test kits are doing well. And once those test kits are validated, mark my words, Africa CDC will ensure that we support in using those test kits for what they should be used for. Thank you so much. I hope I've not left out any of your questions.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. You answered everything. So I'm going to read out 3 questions that we have on the question and answer chat. The first one is, Dr. Abdulaziz, I'm keen to know what Africa CDC is doing with regard to bringing institutions across Africa and African scientists in the diaspora to collaborating and producing workable vaccine for Africa. Second, what is the African CDC doing with regard to preparedness to prevent or respond to emerging disease or outbreaks in Africa? That's from Frank Akamaguna. Then the second question is from Kudakwashe. It says, what is the African Union doing to deal with statistics? It seems a majority of member states have not been consistent in keeping the records and updating them as well. What impact has this had on managing the virus? What impact will that have on the future in terms of our ability to, as a continent, to manage disease? And we have a third person asking. This question is from Laromi Olorunimbe. It says, what is Africa's CDC doing with respect to brain drain in the health sector in African countries? This might be critical for curtailing future pandemic. Over to you, Doctor. Can you just respond to them? Thank you.
Again, another set of excellent questions from the participants of this meeting. The question on emerging disease and what we are doing for vaccines and how are we engaging diaspora Africans to manage. Earlier on in my presentation, I made mention of the Africa Joint Continental Task Force that was set up by Africa CDC to coordinate that the response. Later, one of the technical working group that was formed after that was a vaccine technical working group. We have the IPC. I actually I co-chaired the IPC TWG with Dr. Chikwe from Nigeria. In that IPC TWG, we have prominent Africans from the diaspora. We have Professor Onyama. Some of you will know Professor Onyama. He's among those people that developed the Oxford vaccine, working in that TWG to ensure that we are able to get all the resources possible to support Africa CDC. We cannot do it alone in drafting continental strategies to to help control the COVID-19 pandemic. In that TWG, we also have Professor Elijah. Professor Elijah is from Ghana, and we have many other Africans from the diaspora working in some of the TWGs that we've set up to help in the coordination and response to COVID-19. Specifically for vaccine, like I said, we understood where the problems are, and we are still trying very hard to understand vaccine perception problems that we have on the continent. However, whatever the case, we know one thing, that we are not manufacturing enough vaccines on the continent, and we need to be doing that. And 2 weeks ago, we held one of the biggest conferences since the onset of COVID-19, attended by ministers, by head of states, and over 40,000 eminent people from different parts of the world, scientists and different, going on for more than 2 days. And all what they are talking is how to build the capacity of African countries for the local production of vaccines. It's not good enough that in 1960s and 70s, we were producing vaccine in, let's say, Yaba in Lagos, for instance, in that, is it the Central Public Health Lab? And then fast forward 30 years later, 40 years later, Nigeria is not producing a single vaccine. That is not the right way we should be going. And we in Africa CDC acknowledges that. We know that more than 90% of the vaccine consumed by the continent is being imported. There are systems that have ensured this is what it should be, is happening, but we are working very hard to counter it and ensure that we begin to produce vaccines on the continent. And we will watch out for deliberate actions by Africa CDC, which will include support for research, includes institutional support, will include structural changes, support for structural changes, include support for institutions like NIMA. I'm using Nigeria because we're talking from Nigeria. And if you look at Kenya like Kemri, look at Ghana like Noguchi Institute, support for clinical trials capacity, support for finance, all to ensure that we are able to produce the vaccines locally. So, and in the event of a next pandemic, we don't find ourselves in the same situation we are now. What is the AU doing regards to statistics and data sharing? I want to use the word data sharing because, like this person asking the question rightly said, it has a big effect on response to outbreaks. If we don't share data, we don't share information, then we have big problems. And part of what we are doing is right now we are working with member states to have data sharing agreements, and we are building, like I said earlier, regional networks. So you see, we need to break this, what I call the barriers that are already set up in our mentality, in our head. Nigeria is surrounded by Francophone countries. How much do we talk to our neighbors? If there is Lassa fever in a neighboring city to Lagos, maybe Lassa fever on the other side of Benin Republic, how will Benin Republic be able to call the Nigerian side and say, hey, we have an outbreak on your border, please can you check and let's see what is happening on your side? Because even if Benin Republic controls the outbreak on their side and the Nigerian part is not controlled, we know our borders, let's be honest, it's porous, then it will be back and forth, and probably that's why Lassa fever is now almost endemic in West Africa. So this is some of the things we need to think out of the box. data sharing. And Africa CDC is working towards creating regional networks. We are working very closely with WAO, the West Africa Health Organization. We are working with other networks in Central Africa. We actually started working with them. However, we need to have formal data sharing agreements with all the countries before we will get. How has that impacted the response? And maybe in the future, you can see when there was an outbreak of Ebola again in DRC, we were able to get the countries to work together, and it did not spread as much as it spread in West Africa. We now are in the middle of another outbreak in West Africa, and we're hoping that if we are able to continue to work together and share information, that outbreak will be curtailed pretty soon and will not get to what we had in 2014. So if we don't share data, we don't share information, it's a risk, it's a big risk. That's the short answer. However, we need to continue to ensure that we do that through the existing mechanisms. We have the international health regulation that specify what needs to be immediately notified to WHO and all of that. So it's a work in progress. It's not been where we want it to be, but we'll continue to work on it because of how important it is. Brain drain in the health sector. This goes to health financing. We've like I said earlier, we've seen African diaspora helping now with the pandemic on the continent, like a reverse brain drain. However, it's a good question. I don't have all the answers. We know that this issue is more with the member states. The member state will have to continue to ensure that the financing of health will improve the amount of funding that goes to the health sector to stem this brain drain. We continue to encourage people to stay and help develop the continent. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Aki.
Thank you so very much. I mean, I always like when information, data, when it just flows from your desk, and because you are so in touch, and it shows that we're doing a whole lot on the continent of Africa. I see a hand up from Adekunle Akinola. I'll just have him make his comment, and then with that, we'll come to the end of, okay, then I see Akinpelu also. So we'll just get those two brief comments and your response, and then we will come to the end of the second lecture this afternoon. So please unmute and then go ahead with your questions. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you,
yes,
Dr.
Go ahead. Good morning.
For your presentation. So my question is that Dr. Abdulaziz, can you hear me?
Perfect, loud and clear.
Okay. So you have not responded adequately to the question earlier raised by Dr. Akin Otiko on what is responsible. Is there any research that is ongoing by Africa CDC to show the world what is responsible for the low rate of fatality on the African continent? Because at the inception of the pandemic, there was so many predictions by the World Health Organization that Africa is going to be the epicenter of the pandemic, given the state of our health institutions. However, after a year, it shows that the fatality rate in the region was low compared to other parts of the world. And also on the issue of vaccine discovery on traditional medicine, is there anything that African CDC is doing to encourage, I won't call it local, I'll call it homegrown. And what do I mean by homegrown response? Because the way the pandemic affected us as a region, given our poor health infrastructure, our lack of access to good health facilities, differs from what is obtainable in the West. So is there any way that, because I strongly believe that there may be some homegrown solution that may not work in the West. Because this issue of validation, for instance, the Madagascar experiment, I want us to be careful of waiting for validation. Because look at the Oxford, the AstraZeneca vaccine that we are currently using in Nigeria. So many countries in Europe, they have stopped it. Yet, they are still administering that vaccine in Nigeria. Is it because the vaccine has been is not from us? Because how can we encourage homegrown production of vaccine without waiting for external validation? Because I will tell you, from Nigerian perspective, so many of the COVID-19 protocols were not were not obeyed here. Yet the fatality rate was low. There was a time I was sick that I even went to the hospital. The doctor told me maybe I'm COVID-19 positive, but I didn't bother because one, there was not even a place to test. We don't have enough testing capacity. The only countries that I can say to compare in Africa that should be commended for testing capacity is South Africa, compared to the number of tests that have been done in the region. But Nigeria has not even tested 5% of our population. So how should we tell our own story? What is Africa CDC doing to tell African story? What are those things that is responsible, that are not medically inclined on why we're able to
Hello, sir. Can I just come in here? Can you just put the question so that it will be easier to answer? Just put the question together so that is that.
No, I think I've gotten the.
All right. Okay.
The message, the questions as he's
okay.
Yeah, because of time, we're in the middle of
yes.
a retreat. I need to go back. I'm actually chairing a session. So let me just try to answer as best as I can the way his concerns and listen. You see, in as much as you made mention of the AstraZeneca vaccine, I want you to know that vaccine went through several processes of validation, to ensure that it is safe. What you're seeing is you're seeing one case of blood clots in 1 to 1.5 million persons. Compare that to the number of people that will be saved when they take the vaccines. And what I said earlier, I don't think you got me very right. I said we need to use international best practice for validation of whatever we bring. We cannot, in our right senses, just validate any medication without following the due process. No. And I did not say we need validation from external sources. No. We have, what I said is that I use Nigeria as an example. We have NIMA, we have NCDC, we have many other highly technical institutions that can do validation of any test kit or any vaccine. What we see is that we don't want to subject those things to any form of validation. And I'm sorry, Africa CDC cannot support that kind of non-scientific thing, because if you've seen what this has done in the past, we live in an era where most people have forgotten how these things were done in the past, and the way it has caused harm. In the past, you just grab somebody and inject him with a viral disease or something, and you wait and see how, and if he dies, fine. I mean, we're not animals. So we cannot just get something and say we support it because it's from Africa. No. Let me tell you, if you go back a few years back, there was a very serious issue in northern Nigeria, Kano State, when a company came in and without following, I don't know, maybe they didn't follow, maybe they followed due process, and people started dying. That country paid dearly for it. So you don't joke with people's life. You have to follow international process. When I say international, it includes Africa. So if we develop something and NIMA is able to validate it, then that's okay. We do not say it has to be taken to another continent to be validated. But if you develop something, you don't want it validated, just like in some years back, HIV, we had people who said they can cure HIV. In the end, what happened? Who pays? Who is responsible? So we really need to be scientific. We are a scientific organization, and we need to use a minimum level of science, and in the same process, support indigenous people to develop their products. And when we say develop vaccines indigenously, we are also saying they should develop these vaccines following real protocol. You don't just go take something from some virus and say you've developed a vaccine and you start vaccinating people with it. No, nobody does that anymore. There are basic things that needs to be followed before we can do that. The low death rates, again, I want us to understand something. We do not have answers to everything now. That is the truth. What we are doing is supporting different research in different countries, supporting people who are bringing up scientific protocol, supporting data collection. Somebody mentioned data collection earlier. When we get all this data, we can be able to analyze it, and we can be able to know what is responsible. And we have something in Africa that we have to be extremely careful. Yes, the impact in Africa was very low compared to what was predicted, but there was an impact. You talked about you had something you didn't go to test. That was not right. That was not right. You should have gone to test. If you have COVID, you protect your family. You see, this COVID, because it was killing elderly people, people above. So sometimes the youth behave in a way that it's really unbelievable. Not just in Africa, in every part of the world. You have symptoms, mild symptoms. You don't test. You don't follow the, like you said, you don't follow the COVID-19 protocol. You go infect your grandmother and she dies. We've seen it everywhere. And I challenge anybody to say he has not seen somebody dying from COVID-19. We need to follow our trusted people. We need to follow our institutions. We need to understand what our health authorities are telling us. This is the truth. We need to ensure that we keep to COVID-19 protocols, and we need to ensure that if we have any opportunity to protect ourselves, we protect ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We're way past the time for the second session. I know there's a hand. Akipelo has his hand on. Can I just give you 30 seconds? Just 30 seconds to just, if it's something that has not been mentioned, I give you 30 seconds to just do that, because we're way past the time for afternoon.
And I'm sorry I really need to go because we are in a
seminar.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the discussion continues tomorrow. The colloquium is 2 days. So if there is a question that we have not responded to, we will attend to that tomorrow. There's also one on the question and answer session. I just want to thank you especially for your time and for the contribution and for letting us know what African Union is doing. Many things you said are very important, but one significant thing is the African Medical Supply Platform. Europe was in crisis because they all became individuals. So if we have a common front, it helps us to fight. Once again, on behalf of the organizers of the colloquium, we thank Professor Salako for the first talk, and Dr. Abdulaziz, we cannot thank you enough. Keep up the good work, and we hope to have you share more experiences with us. Success in your retreat. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
On that note,
bye.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
I say thank
on
you
that
very
note,
much.
we bring you to
I really appreciate being on this colloquium, and it's a dialogue. We must continue to dialogue with our people. Yes, this pandemic has not been as bad as we all wanted it to be this way. Nobody in fact, we wanted it to be less than this. Keep it away from the continent, but it got to the continent, and thank good God, it's not the way people expected it to be. It's a combination of many factors. We don't have all the answers. The answers will continue to come in the many years and even decades to come. Don't forget, we are still getting answers to the Spanish flu that happened in 2019. So, but one way or the other, let's be rest assured that we will continue to work very hard to ensure that the continent has a continental body that can respond to the needs of the continent. Over to you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so very much. Just right now, we're going to have a lunch break. Tomorrow, just to announce again that tomorrow, the colloquium begins at 10 South African time and 9 a.m. Nigerian time. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us online. We hope to see you again tomorrow. Thank you. God bless.
Oh, that's cool. Interesting session. See you all guys tomorrow.
Okay, Prof. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you.